This is Law Journal.
An error occurs in surgery and the medical staff looks at one another and they know the story. Medical malpractice, or at least a medical error, has occurred. Now, are these medical professionals bound to tell others about this particular instance of malpractice? Do they have to go to the patient later on and say, you know, a medical error, a bit of medical malpractice occurred in that operating room? Or don't they have that responsibility? Good evening, I'm Attorney Christopher Naughton, and welcome to this week's edition of Law Journal. Something very interesting, something relatively new on the horizon, a new patient safety standard when it comes to medical malpractice. What obligation do medical professionals have to report their own medical malpractice? I'm joined by three guests in the studio tonight, all of them colorful, all of them opinionated. Stephen Scheller to my immediate left, personal injury attorney with Scheller, Ludwig & Beatty, over 3 decades in practice representing plaintiffs injured in workers' compensation matters, medical malpractice, big product liability, and other PI matters as well. Pat Iyer in the middle, if you will, representing both plaintiffs and defendants in a way. Pat is not an attorney. We get the fresh perspective of a professional who is not a lawyer. Pat is a registered nurse. She is an author and a lecturer as well, but perhaps best known for her work as a medical expert and as the president of MedLeague Support Services in New Jersey, representing, or I should say, helping those attorneys who represent plaintiffs and defendants in medical malpractice and personal injury matters. Frank Allen joins us tonight, and also very, again, a kind of a unique perspective with Frank. He is a plaintiff's attorney when it comes to med mal cases, but he also represents doctors and hospitals. So again, sometimes he wears the defense hat, sometimes he wears the plaintiff's hat, so we get a very unique perspective from this entire panel. Steve, Pat, Frank, good to see you guys as always. Again, here we're going to go. We're going to try this. 10 to 25 words. We're going to try it again, see if it works. Let's just move on down the line here, and let's get your gut opinion to the question I'm going to ask. And here it is. Do medical professionals have the absolute duty to report to the patient anything that smacks of a medical error or medical malpractice? Pat Iyer, what do you think?
Doctors and nurses are ethically obligated to tell the family and the patient when a mistake has occurred. They have not been mandated to do so up to this point, but under the new standards that go into effect on July 1st, they will be required to reveal that information. And
we're going to get to that in just a second. Pat, let's go to these new rules which went into effect, have gone into effect July 1st, okay? What are they? Where do they come from? And why is anything new?
They come from the Joint Commission, which is a voluntary accreditation, although it's not truly voluntary, because in order for a hospital or other agency to get Medicare reimbursement, they have to be accredited. They have to meet certain standards. The impact or the focus on patient safety has come from increasing public awareness of the risks in healthcare facilities, which were first revealed in the 1980s by a study that showed the risks, and people all agree that the risks are there, they're very real, and need to be reduced by making it a safer environment. So there are broad safety standards that impact many different types of healthcare facilities.
But this is the medical profession, the hospital profession, if you will, watchdogging themselves more or less. Is that correct?
That is correct in the sense that the agency seeks Joint Commission accreditation. In order to be accredited, they have to meet the standards of that body. Again,
this is not some sort of state or national legislative enactment. Let's make that very clear. But if you break the rules, I suspect there could be sanctions applied.
There certainly could. There are instances where Joint Commission may investigate as a result of a patient complaint, and then they will find out if the patients were indeed told the truth by the healthcare professionals.
There could very well be a conspiracy here. I mean, Pat, if malpractice, or let's even just say a medical error takes place on that operating table, it's usually not just the operating doctor who knows about it. Is that right?
Everyone in the room knows about it.
Usually, right? And how many people, and depending on the surgery and how severe it is, how many people are in that room normally?
6 to 8 people.
So in some ways, people just look the other way? The medical staff in the past have just looked away?
Sometimes the written incident reports. I've been involved in several cases where nurses have told family members directly, you ought to see an attorney.
No kidding.
Because they're
off the record is what they tell
Off the record, don't quote me, but you ought to contact an attorney. Nurses are patient advocates, and they tend to want to protect patients.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Since you've brought these new standards to our attention, which again, in essence, this joint committee and these new rules, which are more than exhorting, but are demanding that medical professionals report their own malpractice. I'm thinking to myself, why did we need rules like this? I mean, Frank Allen's telling me that his clients, his doctors, his hospitals, they clearly would not engage in this kind of activity, this kind of conduct. We've heard of idiotic conspiracies, that sort of thing. So why the rules then?
I think the vast majority of healthcare professionals are open and honest about their mistakes. But our culture is such in our healthcare system that when people report their errors, there are a lot of disincentives. They can be reported to licensing bureaus, they can lose their jobs, they can have a medical malpractice suit filed against them. So a small number of people have worked very hard to keep their errors quiet, secret, and not revealed. And these standards are saying, you have to tell. You have to take the consequences. It's the right thing to do. So you have to look at what caused that problem and fix it so it doesn't affect somebody else.
So under these new rules then, is it going to be incumbent upon other members of that medical staff, if a doctor commits what appears to be malpractice, if the doctor doesn't report it, now the anesthesiologist or the physician's assistant or the nurse or whomever, do they have that affirmative duty now to report?
They certainly have a duty to inform the risk manager and have the risk manager at the facility involved in the discussions with the family. And often immediate discussion about what went wrong, as Frank alluded to, we made a mistake, is what the person needs to hear. It's when the mistake is covered up and the family gets the runaround and they're given a story that just doesn't quite make a mistake, doesn't make sense, that they recognize that something's being hidden, and that fuels anger, suspicion, paranoia, and then the desire to seek legal assistance as soon as that person's out of that situation and they're discharged, and it's now safe to go find an attorney.
I can't conceive of there being an error that's going to affect a person's treatment that the physician or someone there would not come clean on, which is kind of what you were saying, I think. Certainly, at least that's the way I took it, that certainly if this is going to affect their future treatment or there's a problem need to be addressed, I really have a hard time conceiving of a bunch of professionals saying we're not going to tell the patient this and they're not going to be treated or this isn't going to be repaired. I think that is sort of fantasy.
Well, I'd like to give an example of a doctor that I spoke to recently whose mother-in-law had a surgery and found out. They asked the credentials of the doctor before the procedure. They both said that they were board certified and had done these procedures many times. There was an error in the operating room. The mother-in-law was sent off to the intensive care unit. The family was never informed of this. They found out later that the credentials were not what they said they would be. And it was only when the doctor, the son-in-law, saw the medical record and recognized that the patient had lost 6 units of blood and was bleeding in the operating room that he put it together. But his father-in-law said, I'm not going to sue, it's not going to bring her back. And that's another issue. Now, what happened doesn't change the system and it doesn't impact the people who made the mistake. It just simply died right there.
Let's put it this way, Pat. I'd love to bring that case in front of a jury. If there was a bad result, it could be imputed to that doctor, and then we found out the doctor lied.
Yes, but we
may be talking punitive damages. Probably not, but possibly.
But you also have to take into account that every doctor is entitled to have a learning curve in order to do a procedure. And at what point do you say he's had enough experience that this is a bad result and he should have known better, versus he's learning how to do it? It's like learning how to drive a car. You're going to make mistakes. And
but if
that's a difficult issue to deal with.
If I hire a lawyer, or I go to a law firm, and I go to senior partner, and all of a sudden I find out the junior partner or junior associate, or I'm just out of law school, a law clerk, summer law clerk is handling my case. I'm going to have something to say to that senior partner. Say, I don't want the junior law clerk to handle my case. I want you to handle my case. And if you don't, I'm going to go to law firm B down the street.
And there have been cases where patients have signed an informed consent to have a particular surgeon do a procedure and then found out later there was a substitution.
Pat, do you anticipate under these new rules that we're going to have safer operating rooms, safer hospitals? I mean, if that is the genesis, if that is hopefully the spark behind coming up with this new patient safety standard, do you think it'll work?